for the companies who may have done it successfully or are trying to be as close as they feel that, hey, listen, we always got to keep pushing the boundary. What is it that they do? In other words, do they do more of this frequently rather than the one-off? That's number one. And number two, it all sounds great, right? And typically, I would imagine that if you're talking, workshop, whether it's an offsite or wherever, the senior leaders always have some form of resistance. They think, John, this is great, but I've got to worry about next quarter and my investors and the earnings that, if I fall short, I may not even be around, right? So what are some of the most common roadblocks or blocks that you get? So two questions again. One is, what are some of the roadblocks that typically you get as you undertake this? And for the companies who you admire, and maybe you can name one or two where you can say that, they continue to kind of do this or they repeat this at a certain frequency or whatever, right?
Yeah, so this is always the question. This is what we call the sort of the Monday morning sort of like issue, right? If I go back to the office on Monday, what do I do with this, right? It's wonderful that we could step back and think about the future and different possibilities. But how do I actually bring this back to my organization in a meaningful way? So how I often like to end engagements, and it really varies, right? Are we doing a strategy-focused engagement? Is it policy planning? Is it decision-making? So oftentimes, a lot of those outputted up front based on, what we're trying to feed into. But I often end with this, okay, I want people to think about three things. What's something that they want to learn based on the engagement that we've had? What's a conversation that they want to have based on the engagement that we've had? And then is there some action that they can take within the organization within a very short period of time? And I try to establish those as commitments, because a lot of times you go off and you have that experience or you have this sort of contained space to question, and then you go back to normal on a Monday. So I really try to get those commitments and that accountability to sort of follow up to be able to do that. To your point, this really highlights the importance of having a continuous practice. So there was a 7-year study of multinationals in Europe that do foresight. And what they found was those that fell into the vigilant category, those that invested in having a continuous practice of foresight, they actually were more profitable than their peers, and they had a bigger market cap. So what it's suggesting is there really is a business case for foresight. And so there are some really great examples. Bosch was one, DHL was another. Of course, Royal Dutch Shell has had a long-standing foresight practice for decades. So lots of organizations realizing that, of course, foresight is very much about trying to bring different perspectives, broaden points of view, enhance risk management or strategy or planning, but actually it can have a real value to the organization, whether it's innovation or thinking about very operational decisions as well.
Sure. Excellent. And some of the companies that you mentioned, John, whether it's Bosch or DHL, right? Was it more that they're happy and involved in the process, or did you sense that, maybe if you work directly or not, but where was there something that they almost, for example, like a lot of companies, just woke up one fine day and didn't have a work from home policy and they had to adjust sort of on an SOS basis, but some companies transitioned it beautifully. And even for some of the supply chain disruption they were doing, there's always the kind of the backup of if company A or country A doesn't work out, then I go from China to somewhere else. So I'm just wondering, like, were there specific things that you sense that helped them, or do you just feel that having to do this routinely have made them a little more nimble in terms of adapting?
Yeah. Well, certainly there were lots of organizations that I think were really left flat-footed by a lot of the challenges that, COVID in particular had raised. I would say that certainly the organizations that had real practices around innovation, that had that sort of operational or even the strategic agility that I think foresight can help to bring, really were able to adapt and to move. So I wouldn't have, one particular example of a company that I think did everything well, because I think this is another thing about foresight is, of course, even though many people were anticipating exactly something like this, certainly there was a precedent that the particularity of when it's happening clearly requires sometimes even novel foresight, right? Or engaging with what's sort of playing itself out. So certainly there are lots of organizations that tried to pivot and tried to shift exactly on these types of policies. But for the most part, right, the dynamics of how COVID unfolded, which also too, I think were certainly brought lots of questions to bear around workplace and health and other issues that really I think challenged organizations to not only look forward but of course to look in. So I would say specifically that one of the things that foresight has been able to do is to help them think about the implications and understand as they're going through the process. So, for example, lots of organizations that wanted to focus on what they might do next really came to the fore during COVID. So I actually was working with the Center for Disease Control in the US, looking at some of these issues and questions. And they have a longstanding relationship with the University of Houston, where I teach in the graduate program of foresight.